In 1948, a coal miner's wife in eastern Kentucky fed a family of 9 every Sunday from one black cast-iron skillet that had never once touched a drop of soap. That skillet was older than she was. Today it would sell for more than she earned in a month. Most people think Sunday dinner meant a roast in the oven. The truth is, the whole meal came out of one pan on top of the stove. Number 14 on this list was so good that neighbors invited themselves over uninvited. Number 3 could stretch a quarter's worth of meat across a full table. These 25 skillet meals built American families. Then we bought non-stick and forgot them. Hit that subscribe button and let's count down the 25 forgotten cast-iron skillet meals Grandma made every Sunday that nobody cooks anymore. Number 25, skillet fried potatoes and onions. Before Sunday dinner had a single fancy thing on the table, it had a skillet full of potatoes. Your grandmother sliced them thin, dropped them into hot bacon grease with a whole onion cut into rings, and let them cook low and slow until the edges turned deep gold and crisp, while the middles went soft and creamy. She did not stir them much. She knew that stirring broke the crust, and the crust was the whole point. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost about 39 cents in the early 1950s, and the grease was already sitting in a coffee can on the back of the stove, saved from breakfast. That was the genius of it. Nothing was bought special. The potatoes soaked up the smoke of the pork fat and turned into something no restaurant home fry has ever matched. Children fought over the crispy bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. We replaced this with frozen hash browns that taste like nothing, and we called that progress. Number 24, fried cornmeal. Mush. On Saturday night, your great-grandmother boiled cornmeal into a thick porridge, poured it into a loaf pan, and set it in the cold pantry to firm up overnight. On Sunday morning, she turned that solid block out, sliced it a half-inch thick, and fried each piece in the skillet until the outside formed a shattering golden shell around a soft, steaming center. She served it with butter and molasses, or a pour of sorghum syrup. A pound of cornmeal cost pennies and stretched a family through the leanest weeks of winter. This was Depression food that survived into the good years because it simply tasted wonderful. The contrast of crackling crust against that smooth middle was pure comfort. Today, most Americans have never even heard of it. The knowledge lived in the hands of women who never wrote it down, and when they passed, so did the recipe. Number 23, hoe cakes. Before biscuits became the Sunday bread of the South, there were hoe cakes, and every grandmother had her own version. Cornmeal, a little flour, salt, and buttermilk stirred into a loose batter, then dropped by the spoonful into a screaming hot greased skillet where it spread into a lacy, crisp-edged little cake. Legend says field hands cooked them on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over the fire, and the name stuck. They came off the skillet fast, one after another, and got stacked on a plate in the warming oven until dinner. Slathered with butter, they soaked up pot liquor and gravy like nothing else. A batch cost almost nothing and used exactly what was already in the pantry. Hoe cakes were the bread of people who did not have money for yeast or an oven that held heat. They were humble and they were perfect, and now they exist mostly as a footnote in old church cookbooks. Number 22, fried green tomatoes. Long before a movie made them famous, fried green tomatoes were simply what you did with the tomatoes that would not ripen before the first frost. Your grandmother sliced the hard green fruit thick, dredged each slice in cornmeal, seasoned with salt and pepper, and laid them into hot grease until both sides turned crackling brown. The tomato inside stayed tart and firm, almost meaty, a sharp bite against the crunchy coating. Nothing on the vine went to waste. When the season turned and the garden was dying, this was how a family kept eating from it. A whole meal of fried green tomatoes and cornbread cost next to nothing and tasted like the very end of summer. She served them straight from the skillet, too hot to touch, and everyone burned their fingers anyway because they could not wait. Now, they show up on restaurant menus at $11 a plate, and almost nobody makes them at home. Number 21, fried cabbage with bacon. 1 head of cabbage, a few strips of bacon, a hot skillet, and 20 minutes. That was the entire recipe, and it fed a table. Your grandmother fried the bacon first, then dropped the chopped cabbage right into the drippings and let it cook down until the edges caramelized and turned sweet, and the whole thing collapsed into something silky and rich. A head of cabbage cost a dime and could feed 6 people. Bacon was for flavor, not for bulk, so 2 or 3 slices did the whole job. The smell filled the house by early afternoon and told everyone that dinner was coming. This was a dish that asked almost nothing of a tired cook. No careful timing, no fussing, just heat and patience. It crossed every regional line in America because cabbage was cheap everywhere and kept for weeks in a cool cellar. We forgot it the moment we could afford to fill the table with meat instead. Number 20, salmon croquettes. Friday might have been fish day, but salmon croquettes showed up on plenty of Sunday tables too, because a tall can of pink salmon cost about 25 cents and stretched further than any fresh fish ever could. Your grandmother drained the can, picked out the big bones, and mixed the salmon with crushed saltines, a beaten egg, and a little grated onion. She shaped the mixture into flat patties and fried them in the skillet until the outsides went deep golden and crisp, while the insides stayed moist and tender. Served with a spoon of creamed peas or a wedge of cornbread, this felt like a real supper, the kind you might order at a diner. Here is the part nobody knew back then. The soft bones she left in a few of the patties were pure calcium, exactly what doctors now tell older people to eat for their bones. She did not know the science. She just knew it was cheap, and it held together in the pan. Number 19, ham steak with red-eye gravy. When there was a little money for a slice of country ham, Sunday breakfast became something close to a celebration. Your grandmother laid the thick, salty ham steak into a hot cast-iron skillet and seared both sides until the edges curled and the fat rendered down. Then, while the pan still hissed with browned bits stuck to the bottom, she poured in a cup of black coffee and scraped everything loose. That coffee reduced into a thin, dark, glistening gravy the color of a copper penny, sharp and smoky and utterly unlike anything sweet. They called it red-eye gravy, and men spooned it over grits and biscuits and even the ham itself. The bitterness of the coffee cut clean through the heavy salt of the cured pork. It cost nothing extra because the coffee was already made. This was mountain cooking at its cleverest, and it has nearly vanished from American kitchens outside a handful of old diners in Tennessee and Virginia. Number 18, fried okra. In the deep summer, when the okra came in faster than anyone could eat it, your grandmother sliced the pods into little wheels, rolled them in cornmeal, and fried them crisp in a shallow pool of hot grease. The coating turned golden and crunchy, while the okra inside went tender, and every bit of that famous sliminess disappeared into the heat. A colander full of okra from the garden cost nothing at all. She stood at the stove turning the pieces with a slotted spoon, and the smell pulled children in from the yard before she even called them. Fried okra was proof that the humblest, oddest vegetable in the garden could become the thing everyone reached for first. It never traveled well and never reheated right, so it had to be eaten straight from the skillet, standing up, half of it gone before it ever reached the table. That is exactly why it was never written down properly and why so few people make it now. Here is where the story gets interesting. The skillet itself was the secret, and it was the one thing in the kitchen that a family truly owned forever. A good cast iron skillet was not bought at the store every few years, like our pans today. It was inherited. It passed from a mother to a daughter on her wedding day, already black and slick from 40 years of Sunday dinners, already seasoned by thousands of meals cooked in its surface. Your grandmother never washed it with soap because soap would strip the layer of polymerized fat that made it non-stick and gave every dish its faint, savory depth. She wiped it clean, rubbed it with a little grease, and hung it back on the wall. That skillet held the memory of every meal ever cooked in it. Food scientists now confirm what she knew by instinct, that a well-seasoned iron surface conducts and holds heat more evenly than almost anything money can buy today. We threw them out for non-stick pans that warp, scratch, and end up in a landfill in 3 years. Number 17, skillet baked beans. This was not the sweet, gluey stuff from a can. Your grandmother started with dried navy beans soaked overnight, then baked them slow in the cast iron skillet with molasses, a chopped onion, a spoon of mustard, and a piece of salt pork laid right on top. Hours in a low oven turned them thick, dark, and rich, the pork rendering down through the whole pot, while the top formed a sticky, caramelized crust. A pound of dried beans cost about a dime and fed the family for 2 days. This was the dish that sat next to the ham at every church supper and every Sunday table across New England and the rural Midwest. The beans drank up the smoke and sweetness until they tasted like they had been cooking for a week. We traded this for a can we heat in a microwave, and we lost the entire depth of flavor that only time and a good skillet could build. Number 16, liver and onions. This is the one that makes people flinch now, but in your grandmother's kitchen, it was a Sunday treat, and there was a reason. Beef liver cost about 20 cents a pound because butchers had more of it than anyone wanted, and it was one of the most nutritious things a poor family could put on the table, packed with iron and vitamin B12. She sliced it thin, dredged it in seasoned flour, and cooked it fast in the skillet, no more than 2 minutes aside, while a mountain of onions caramelized chuffed and sweet in a second pan. The trick was the timing. Cook it too long and it turned to leather, which is exactly why a whole generation grew up hating it. Done right, it was mild and rich, the outside crisp, the inside barely pink. She piled the onions on top and served it with mashed potatoes. We stopped making it because we could afford to. The nutrition never went anywhere. The knowledge did. Number 15, fried catfish. On a Sunday after a good week of fishing, or when the money reached far enough for a mess of catfish at the market, your grandmother rolled the fillets in cornmeal and dropped them into deep, screaming hot grease in the cast iron skillet. The coating puffed and crackled into a golden shell, while the fish inside steamed, sweet and flaky. She cooked them in batches, keeping the finished pieces warm while the grease came back up to temperature, because she knew fish dropped into cool oil turned greasy and sad. Served with hush puppies fried in the same fat and a scoop of coleslaw, this was a feast that cost almost nothing on a Rivertown budget. The smell of frying cornmeal and fish carried clear down the road. Fried catfish was the Sunday meal of the whole lower Mississippi and every farm pond in between. It has become restaurant food now, something you drive to and pay for, when once it came out of a skillet in every country kitchen in the South. Number 14, Swiss steak. Here is the dish that made neighbors invite themselves over. Your grandmother took the cheapest, toughest cut of round steak, the kind that would chew like a boot if you just fried it, and pounded flour into it with the edge of a heavy plate until the fibers broke down. Then she browned it hard in the skillet, laid onions and a can of tomatoes over the top, clamped on a lid, and let it barely simmer for 2 full hours. That long, slow, moist heat transformed shoe leather into meat so tender it fell apart under a fork, swimming in a thick, tangy gravy. A pound of round steak cost about 40 cents and fed the whole family with gravy to spare over mashed potatoes. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from Swissing, the old word for running fabric or meat through rollers to soften it. This was frugal genius, cheap meat made luxurious by nothing but time and a covered skillet, and it has almost completely disappeared from the American table. Number 13, skillet macaroni and cheese. Long before the blue box, there was real macaroni and cheese, and plenty of grandmothers made it right in the cast iron skillet. She boiled the elbows, stirred them into a simple sauce of butter, flour, and milk melted with a hunk of sharp store cheese, then poured the whole thing into the buttered skillet, topped it with more cheese and a few cracker crumbs, and baked it until the top blistered brown and the edges went crisp and lacy against the hot iron. Those crunchy edges where the cheese met the skillet were the most fought-over bites at the table. A batch cost maybe 30 cents and fed everyone. This was Sunday indulgence, the dish that made a plain meal feel like plenty. The box version that replaced it is faster, but it has never once produced that crackling brown crust or that deep, real cheese flavor that only a hot skillet and an oven could build. Here is something the food industry would rather you not think about. Every single meal on this list is cheap because it uses ingredients no company can mark up. Dried beans, cornmeal, potatoes, cabbage, the tough cuts of meat, the organ meats, the parts of the animal nobody else wanted. There is no advertising budget behind a bag of cornmeal. There is no brand loyalty in a head of cabbage or a slab of liver. That is exactly why you never saw a commercial for Swiss steak or fried okra, and why no company built an empire on skillet potatoes. Your grandmother's Sunday table was a masterpiece of using everything and wasting nothing. The whole animal, the whole garden, the cheapest bins at the market, transformed by skill into food worth gathering around. Then the frozen dinner arrived, and the marketing told us that cooking from scratch was a burden we deserved to escape. We believed it, and we handed away 100 years of knowledge for the convenience of a box. Number 12, chicken fried steak with milk gravy. Take that same cheap, tough round steak, but instead of stewing it, your grandmother pounded it thin, dipped it in egg and seasoned flour, and fried it in the skillet exactly like fried chicken until it wore a shattering golden crust. Then she poured off most of the grease, left the browned bits stuck to the bottom, sprinkled in flour, and whisked in milk until it thickened into a peppery white gravy, scraping up every bit of flavor from the pan. Poured over the steak and a pile of mashed potatoes, this was Sunday dinner across Texas, Oklahoma, and the whole Great Plains. It turned a 40-cent cut of gristle into something that tasted like celebration. The gravy was the miracle, a whole sauce made from nothing but drippings, flour, meat, or in milk. Every Plains grandmother made it without a recipe. Today it survives mostly in truck stops and diners, when once it came out of a skillet in a farmhouse kitchen every Sunday afternoon. Number 11, sausage gravy and biscuits. On Sunday morning before church, your grandmother crumbled a little breakfast sausage into the cast iron skillet and browned it until the fat rendered out and the bottom of the pan turned dark with flavor. Then she stirred in a spoon of flour to soak up that grease and poured in milk, whisking slow until it thickened into a rich, peppery gravy studded with bits of sausage. She split her hot biscuits, laid them open on the plate, and drowned them in it. A half-pound of sausage stretched into gravy that fed the whole family, because the gravy, not the meat, was the point. This was the meal that sent farmers and coal miners into a hard day full and satisfied. The skillet did all the work, one pan from sausage to sauce. We buy it frozen now or in a can, and it tastes like paste. The real thing took 10 minutes and cost almost nothing, and a whole generation grew up on it. Number 10, smothered pork chops. When the family could afford pork chops, your grandmother did not just fry them and call it done. She browned them hard in the skillet, then buried them, smothered them under a thick blanket of onions and a gravy built from their own drippings and a little milk or broth. She clamped on the lid and let them cook low until the chops went so tender the meat pulled away from the bone and the gravy soaked into everything. Cheap, thin chops that would have been dry and tough under a broiler turned silky and rich under that slow, covered heat. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, this was Sunday comfort at its deepest. The technique of smothering browning meat, then finishing it slow under gravy and a lid, was one of the great secrets of Southern cast iron cooking, and it made the humblest cut taste expensive. We stopped taking the time. Now we grill a chop in 4 minutes and wonder why it tastes like nothing. Number 9, hamburger steak with onion gravy. Farmers called it poor man's steak, and it fed millions. Your grandmother shaped a pound of ground beef into thick oval patties, seasoned them simple with salt and pepper, and seared them in the hot skillet. Then she pulled them out, cooked sliced onions down in the drippings until they went sweet and soft, stirred in a little flour, and poured in water or milk to build a deep brown onion gravy right in the pan. The patties went back in to simmer under that gravy until everything married together. Ground beef cost about 43 cents a pound, and 1 pound fed the whole table when it was drowned in gravy and served over potatoes. This was the meal that made cheap meat feel like a real steak dinner on a Sunday when there was no money for the real thing. Restaurants later dressed it up and called it Salisbury steak. Your grandmother just called it supper, and she made it better. Number 8, fried apples. When the apple trees dropped their fruit in the fall, your grandmother filled the cast iron skillet with sliced apples, a knob of butter, a scatter of brown sugar, and a shake of cinnamon, and cooked them down slow until they went soft and glossy and the syrup thickened around them. She served them alongside pork or ham or spooned warm over biscuits as something close to dessert. A bushel of apples from the yard cost nothing, and this turned them into the taste of autumn itself. The whole kitchen smelled of cinnamon and caramelizing sugar by early afternoon. Fried apples sat in that comfortable place between a side dish and a treat, the sweet note on a heavy Sunday plate. They kept for days and got better as they sat. This was one of the simplest, most beloved things to ever come out of a country skillet, and now it survives mostly as a memory of grandmothers who made it every fall without ever measuring a thing. Here is what the recipes never tell you. Sunday dinner was never really about the food. It was the one meal of the week when the whole family sat down together, when the work stopped, when the good plates came out, and grace was said, and children were made to wash their hands and stay at the table until everyone was finished. The skillet meals were the anchor of a ritual that has almost entirely dissolved from American life. Your grandmother spent her Sunday morning at the stove, not because she loved to cook, but because feeding her people well was how she showed love in a time when there were few other ways to say it. Every dish on this list carried that weight. The smell of frying chicken or baking cornbread meant home, meant safety, meant that no matter how hard the week had been, on Sunday there was a full table and a family around it. We did not just lose the recipes, we lost the afternoon. Number 7, skillet cornbread. This is the dish that defined the Southern table, and it was never ever made in a pan. Your grandmother heated the empty cast iron skillet in the oven with a spoon of bacon grease inside until it smoked, then poured the cornmeal batter into that screaming hot, greased iron so it sizzled the instant it hit. That is what created the legendary crust, a shattering, deep brown bottom that no muffin tin or glass dish could ever produce. Real cornbread had almost no sugar. It was savory, crumbly, and built to be broken into a bowl of beans or crumbled into buttermilk and eaten with a spoon. A batch cost pennies. It was on the table nearly every day and always on Sunday. The skillet was the whole secret, because only that heavy iron, preheated until it was dangerous, could set that crust. Today, most people make sweet cake-like cornbread in a pan and have never once tasted the real thing that came out of a 50-year-old skillet. Number 6, skillet meatloaf. Before meatloaf lived in a loaf pan, plenty of grandmothers baked it right in the cast iron skillet, shaped into a round, and the results were better for it. She mixed ground beef with bread, soaked in milk, an egg, and grated onion, pressed it into the greased skillet, and topped it with a smear of ketchup or tomato sauce. The iron heated the bottom and the sides at once, so the whole loaf developed a browned, almost crusted exterior instead of steaming pale in a pan. The milk-soaked bread was the trick that kept it moist, stretching a single pound of cheap ground beef into a meal that fed 6 with slices left over for sandwiches. This was the Sunday standby of the entire American middle, from Ohio to Kansas, humble and filling and endlessly forgiving. The skillet gave it an edge the loaf pan never could. We forgot that detail, and meatloaf became the dry, gray joke it is unfairly remembered as today. Number 5, pineapple upside-down cake. This was the show-off dessert, the one that came out for company and Sunday best, and it was born entirely from the cast iron skillet. Your grandmother melted butter and brown sugar in the bottom of the pan, arranged canned pineapple rings in the syrup with a maraschino cherry in each center, then poured cake batter right over the top and baked the whole thing in the skillet. When it came out, she flipped it upside down onto a plate, and the fruit emerged glistening in a dark caramel glaze that had formed against the hot iron. A can of pineapple cost about a quarter and turned a plain cake into the centerpiece of the table. The skillet was essential because only that even heavy heat could caramelize the sugar into that perfect amber layer without burning. It looked like far more effort than it was. This was the cake that made a Sunday feel special, and it has quietly slipped off the American table into the pages of forgotten cookbooks. Number 4, skillet peach cobbler. In peach season, your grandmother poured a simple batter into a buttered cast iron skillet, spooned sweetened fresh peaches over the top, and baked it until the batter rose up and around the fruit into a golden, bubbling, crackling-edged cobbler. The iron browned the crust where nothing else could, giving the bottom and sides a crisp, buttery snap against the soft, syrupy peaches. A basket of peaches from a roadside stand cost almost nothing at the height of summer, and this turned them into the dessert everyone remembered for the rest of their lives. She served it warm, straight from the skillet, sometimes with a pour of cream over the top. The smell of baking peaches and butter meant Sunday was ending well. Cobbler was the perfect country dessert, forgiving and cheap and impossible to ruin, built entirely around the skillet that every kitchen already owned. We buy pie from a case now. Almost nobody bakes a cobbler in iron anymore. Number 3, smothered chicken. This was how a quarter's worth of meat fed a full table. Your grandmother took a cut-up chicken, browned every piece hard in the skillet, then pulled them out, built a gravy from the drippings, flour, and broth, laid the chicken back in, covered the pan, and let it simmer low until the meat fell off the bone into the rich, thick gravy. Even an old stewing hen, tough as rope, turned tender and succulent under that slow, covered heat. Served over rice, the gravy stretched one modest chicken across 8 or 9 plates. This was Sunday dinner for families who could not afford a roast, and it tasted like far more than they paid. The smothering technique, brown then simmer under a lid, was the beating heart of cast iron cooking, turning the cheapest bird into a feast. It fed generations across the South and never once needed a recipe written down. We lost it when the whole rotisserie chicken made it too easy to stop trying. Number 2, cast iron buttermilk biscuits. Long before the pop open can, your grandmother made biscuits by hand every Sunday, and many baked them right in the cast iron skillet, edges touching so they rose tall against each other. She cut cold lard or butter into flour with her fingers, barely stirred in buttermilk, and pressed the soft dough out gently because she knew overworking it made them tough. Nestled into the hot, greased skillet, they baked up with crisp brown bottoms and pillowy, flaky insides that pulled apart in layers. A batch cost pennies and appeared at nearly every meal, but on Sunday they were the vehicle for gravy, for honey, for fried apples, for sopping up every last drop on the plate. The skillet gave them a bottom crust no baking sheet could match. These biscuits were pure skill, made by hands that had done it 10,000 times without measuring. That skill has almost entirely vanished, traded for dough in a tube that will never taste the same. Number 1, cast iron fried chicken. This was the crown of the Sunday table, the meal that meant more than any other, and it lived and died by the skillet. Your grandmother soaked the chicken in buttermilk, dredged it in seasoned flour, and lowered it piece by piece into a skillet of hot lard, where it fried up into the crispest, most golden crust ever created, sealing in meat so juicy it ran when you bit it. The heavy iron held its heat steady even when the cold chicken went in, which is the entire secret, because a lesser pan dropped in temperature and turned the coating greasy and pale. She cooked it in batches, never crowding the pan, turning each piece with care, filling the whole house with a smell that pulled the family toward the table and the neighbors toward the window. Fried chicken was Sunday. It was church and family and the best the week had to offer, all in one skillet. It cost a fraction of what a restaurant charges today, and it was better because it was made by hands that loved you. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The skillet cornbread, the fried apples, the smothered chicken. Then sit down at the table, not in front of the television, and eat it slow. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments, because these were never just Sunday dinners. They were how a whole country said I love you without ever having to say a word.